Hey, this is Andrew from Precursor Productions, and my topic for this video is, what do I need to bring to get my music mixed? So this kind of assumes that you've recorded your own song and you're going into the studio to work with a professional mix engineer, so you've made a recording yourself. What do you need to bring that person in order for them to give you a professional mix? Now, this can open a whole can of worms, but it's an important question because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about how this process is and how complicated it is, and it actually is a pretty straightforward process. Now, when you've made your own recording, you've usually used some kind of recording software, Pro Tools, Cubase, Reaper, Record. There's a number of different ones on the market that you've used to make your recording. And it's a multi-track recording, so you have multiple different tracks. You might have a guitar on one track, a vocal on another track, a bass on another track. Drums might occupy a whole bunch of tracks, usually one per instrument, so kick, snare, hi-hat, etc. This is known as a multi-track recording. And altogether, this comprises your whole song. Now, the engineer is going to need to have access to mix all of these tracks. So, for example, if your song consists of 24 different tracks of instruments, then you're going to need to give the mix engineer the access to control each one of those 24 tracks in his or her mixing process. There's a couple different ways this can occur. One is by simply bringing the session from the software, so a whole Pro Tools session or Cubase song, for example, archiving that onto an external media, like an external drive or something like that, and then bringing it to the engineer. Now, this assumes that the engineer would have a copy of the software that you use and they know how to use it, and that's often the case nowadays. And if that's the case, then the engineer can take that project and they themselves can render out, which means basically exporting out the different component parts that you're going to need or they're going to need in order to make your mix. So that's one way the process can work. The downside of that is that it can get a bit complicated and it can get a little more costly. But it does allow the engineer to render out only precisely what they need, so that's the benefit. Now, a lot of times the engineer may not have a copy of the same software that you use, or they also may not know how to use it, so that the onus is on you to create something that they can actually work with in a mix. Usually the process there is that we do what's called rendering. We render out each one of the different instruments. So in this case, you would handle that process, and you would basically render out each one of the different instruments. So in an example of a song which comprises 24 tracks of different instruments, each one would be rendered out as a separate mono or stereo file. It's also very important that in order to keep everything synchronized, you render them to be the exact length of your entire song. So even if you have just a vocal that only occurs incidentally in a couple short places, it's very important to render out that entire vocal track the exact same length of the song so that everything stays synchronized as tightly as possible, which is a simple thing to do nowadays, but it's something that people often don't fully understand how to do. Now, another really important question is, what digital resolution should you render your files out at? And of course, the short answer to that is that they should be rendered out at the native resolution of the project. What is the native resolution of the project? Well, quite simply, it's the sample rate and bit depth that you set your sound card and your session or song to when you made that recording. And usually it's pretty easy to find that out if you don't know by just going into the properties of your piece of music within your software. So once again, you need to render out full lengths of your song at the native resolution of the project. These simple tips will allow you to get something a mix engineer can work with. One other point that's really important when sending things to a mix engineer, it's very important that within the digital mixer of your software that you don't have any of the actual audio tracks clipping, which means overloading on the actual digital mixer. And this is a little bit less of an issue in the digital world than it was in the analog world, but it's still very important that especially your master fader, which is the sort of master output of your mix, not be clipping or overloading. And it's also probably a good idea to make sure that you're not exceeding the maximum level on any individual channel on your mixer as well too. By checking that before you make your renders, you'll assure that you get the best possible quality render that the mix engineer can work with most easily. So if you'd like to learn more about how to get the most out of your experience in the studio, simply head over to precursorproductions.com and sign up for our email list. When you do that, I'm going to send you 20 videos that outline how to save time, money, and get the best product when you're working in the studio. I'm also going to offer you 10% off of any of our professional audio production services. So head over to precursorproductions.com, enter your name in our mailing list, and you'll start getting those videos and the discount immediately.